I was tempted so many times throughout the month. I would just like see a book on my shelf and be like, oh, I want to read that. And then say, nope, it's by a man, gotta wait. So I didn't finish a book by a man. I didn't even start a book by a man. I didn't even pick up the books I was in the middle of by men. I'm quite pleased with myself. It was hard though, and I don't think I'll do it again, but hello, my name's Ketevan. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. As you probably know, last month was Women in Translation Month. So normally that's a readathon where there are prompts, I believe, and you read lots of women in translation. But I kind of decided to take a cue from Charlie Reads and Writes, and do only women, even if they weren't women in translation, just only women authors. And I actually did it. I'm very proud of myself. I really honestly didn't think I could do it. I was tempted so many times throughout the month. I would just like see a book on my shelf and be like, oh, I want to read that. And then say, nope, it's by a man, gotta wait. So I didn't finish a book by a man. I didn't even start a book by a man. I didn't even pick up the books I was in the middle of by men. I'm quite pleased with myself. It was hard though, and I don't think I'll do it again. But basically, I read a lot of books by women. So I want to go over the best of the best. This isn't everything I read. It's actually, there's only I think only like 4 or 5 books in translation even, but quite a few others fit sort of the theme of sort of translation. And then a few others I just really thought were great books and I want to talk about them. So yeah, this is more of just like the best books I read in August, which happen to be written all by women. So I have my stacks of all the books I want to talk about here, but actually the first one I want to talk about is not on the stack because I got it from Scribd. It's called Sanaaq, an Inuit novel, and it's written by, I hope I get this right, Mitiarjuk, Nappaaluk. I hope that's vaguely correct. Obviously, she's an Inuit author. And I actually picked up and read the whole book, just assuming she was like a woman, and because, I mean, she is. But then at the end of the book, there were some translator notes, which I read because I was really interested in the translation of this book. I'll go into that in a second. And it mentioned that she's actually kind of like a third gender. So she was the oldest girl in a family with no boys. So that traditionally means that that girl or woman will sort of be like this third gender, where she does both men's and women's work. So yeah, I thought that was like really interesting. And the translator even kind of thought that that was possibly why she was so interested in doing this work. So she wrote this book, this novel, in Inuktitut, which is one of the Inuit languages in northern Canada. And she wrote it in syllabic, so it's not a Latin script. And then an anthropologist actually spent 8 years working with her to translate it into French, which just like it's wow. And so much work putting into this translation to make sure that everything was exactly correct. A lot of the languages she uses around like the different plants and animals and you know, all the specifics, he wanted to get like exactly right. So he worked with her directly, and she wrote it over many years as well. So it's just like a fantastic example of literature and translation, Indigenous literature and translation, just amazing. And then since that took so much work, I believe there's only an English translation, but that English translation is from the French translation. So there's no direct translation from the original Inuktitut, but like, and on top of that, it's a fantastic book, like, wow. And also in the translator notes, they mentioned that she didn't do drafts. Like, she just wrote it. And of course it's episodic. So it's the story of a family, over the years. And so each little chapter, is a different little story about their life. But she didn't like edit herself, which is like, wow. And it's quite good. Like, I mean, like, it doesn't read like, oh, I just threw together some random stories, and I wrote them the one time and didn't edit it. Like, it really feels like a polished novel. So that's just like, to me, extra impressive. But anyway, I loved it so much. And that was probably, is it the best? I think it might have been the best thing I read all month. So yeah, starting strong. And then I am going to move on to this. And this is like a little bit of a fudge because, so this is called The Absent Traveler, Prākrit love poetry from a lot of words I'm not gonna know how to say, but basically this is like ancient South Asian poetry. This is pre-Sanskrit. Prākrit is like a super ancient language, and nobody really knows who the author is, obviously. You know, similar to Homer and the Epic of Gilgamesh, like we've just found, you know, the story, but there's no name that would gender the person necessarily. And the translator is a man. So I was like, oh, is this fudging it? You know, I'm not sure. But once you read it, like, I can't imagine a man writing this. Like, it's just so spot on to women's lives. So yeah, it's not obviously like a slam dunk that this was written by a woman, but it's like so about women and women's lives, and the perspective is so female. Like, I just can't help but assume that at least a woman had a heavy hand in writing these little poems. And so yeah, this professor of literature, this Indian professor of literature, translated them, and it's a very slim volume, but I'm so happy that I found this in a used bookstore and immediately read it. So you know how sometimes a book just falls into your lap and you read it and you're like, okay, that's a book, I read it, end of story. But other times you're very happy, like it seems serendipitous, and I don't know, that's just how I feel about this. So I'm very happy that I have this one now. And then next up is Flights by Olga Tokarczuk, and I've already talked about this quite a bit in another video. I think the haul for this book, that's how quickly I read it. I picked it up on one of my vacations and read it during the vacation. It's basically a very weird combination of travel thoughts, essays, and fictional bits and bobs interspersed. It's very weird, but if you're expecting it, I think it's enjoyable. And I talk more about it in that other video, so I won't say too much. And then I have Poems of Akhmatova, who is a very, who I think is the most famous, Russia's greatest woman poet. I know I bought this quite a few years ago, and it's kind of rare for a book of poetry to sit on my shelf for a long amount of time. But I remember buying this on purpose, probably because I was looking for lists of Russian writers that were women, because it's so much harder to find them compared to the men. But anyway, I bought this quite a few years ago. Don't remember how I got it, but it was on purpose. So I finally just picked it up, and I was delighted, as I expected to be. It's quite short. This is a bilingual edition, so like the Russian's on this side and the English is on the other side. A lot of it's very political, and probably the details of the political stuff went over my head. I mean, obviously a lot of it is like broad strokes referencing communism and things like that, and World War II, I believe, in the beginning, or actually even World War I, because she wrote from, or at least the poems are dated. It's kind of like a chronological collection of her poetry. So the first poem is from 1909, and the last poem is from, hello, where are you? 1941. Oh, so no, that's not true. 1961. They just put a random poem from 1941 at the end. I'm not sure why. But anyway, in general, they're in order. So yeah, it's like a huge swath of Russian history. Yeah, actually, wow, like 1909 to 1961. Yeah, so basically there's a lot of like references to like the general political upheaval, and I'm sure there's more detail in there that I'm missing. The notes at the end, I didn't read them, but they seem quite detailed if you are interested in the political references. I was just reading them for the beautiful poetry, which it did its job. So I really enjoyed that one. So yeah, I think, yeah, that's all the translated lit, and then I have two books that were written in English that I just really love this month. So the first was The Pumpkin Eater by Penelope Mortimer. I don't remember, I packed this on one of my vacations, I believe, and I think it was in the voting video where people voted what I should bring as my last book. And I don't remember if this one won. I know a lot of people voted for it, but I did take it on the vacation, and I didn't read it on the vacation. And then I got back and I said, you know what, I want to read it. So I did, and it was amazing. This is about a woman who has a ton of children. It's autofiction. So the author herself, she had tons of children from a previous marriage. Her husband had quite a few children from a previous marriage, and then they had children together. So they just have this very large family. I think like 8+ children. The character in the book basically is just like always getting pregnant, and she kind of has a mental breakdown, and we've, you know, slowly, quickly learned that her husband's kind of a dirt bag. It's just this wild and wacky story that really just, that like, let's look at women's mental health in the 60s vibe that just, I love that so much. So highly recommend this one. And then almost on the last day of the month, I think, I finished Milkman by Anna Burns. Wow. I've never, maybe this is, I have to admit, this is possibly because I had really low expectations, and I'll explain why in a second. But this won the Man Booker in 2018. And this is the first time I've read a book that won a prize. Not because it won the prize, but just like coincidence-wise. And I was like, wow, that really deserved it. Like, this book deserved that prize. And again, it might be just my low expectations. So everything I've ever heard on YouTube, even in the back of the book, basically just says like it's a story about a girl, and then a rumor starts that she's having an affair with the milkman, and like her life falls apart because the rumor mill just has a life of its own in like a small town. And that's all true. Like, that is what's happening. But that's not what's happening at the same time at all. Like, it's the back of this description and the way people talk about it, to me, is like such a disappointment to what the actual book is. And I don't know, maybe that's just me. I don't know. So anyway, yeah, it is about an 18-year-old girl who, you know, a milkman starts to have a thing for her, and she's not into him, but then the rumors, you know, spin out of control. But it's set, and it doesn't say, it's like, oh, in an unnamed city. It's like, yeah, it's an unnamed city, but obviously it's like in Northern Ireland, and it's during the Troubles. And is this a spoiler? Maybe this is a spoiler. I don't know. I don't think so. But like, the milkman is not the man who delivers their milk. Like, and maybe people, you know, leave that detail out because it's like they consider it a spoiler. But I mean, right away, you know that the milkman is a paramilitary officer, which is like code for like in the IRA, right? Or like whatever. And he's a high-ranking guy in the IRA. And that's why he gets away with whatever he wants to do, because no one can stand up to him because he's kind of like a high-ranking dude. And they call him a milkman. I mean, and well, this is a bit of a spoiler. And I don't think it really matters. Like, it doesn't matter to the story. Initially, you're supposed to think to yourself, like, I'm assuming if you're Irish and you understand, like, if you get it, the context, like, a milkman is a term during the Troubles that they used because they used to deliver bombs in milk crates. So, like, they would pretend to sort of be a milkman and leave some, you know, milk in a crate on a corner, and then it would explode, right? So that was why they were called milkmen. But then later in the book, we find out that that's not really why everyone calls him that that's just his name. And it's like, it's one of those like moments where you're like, oh, did I think he was scarier than he really was? Like, I don't know. It's just, I'm rambling. This is actually, I think, yeah, this is my, it's between Sanaaq and this one. Those are my two favorite books this month. Loved it. It is super political. It's not really about rumors. I mean, it is. Like, it is about the rumors and how that kind of like can change things, but it's not like the way you think of like small town America, like, oh, she's a slut and we're going to talk about her, and like, it's not, the stakes are much higher, and it's very political, and it's very violent, and it's very much about violence against women. That's not just the milkman. Like, it's not just this one guy that's like obsessed with her and stalking her. It's the general violence against women that happened during the Troubles that nobody really wants to talk about because it's considered like lower level, like considering the other violence that was happening at the time. But anyway, I really think this is going to become a classic in Irish literature, so can't recommend that one enough. Obviously, I'll stop talking now. And then I have two books that are not really novels. They're not, they're not in translation, but I think that they kind of speak to it. And the first one, I'll just go over quickly. I think I've already spoken about this on another I've already spoken about this in another video. It's called Border, A Journey to the Edge of Europe by Kapka Kassabova, who's a Bulgarian writer. And this one's written in English. It's nonfiction. And it's about the borders between Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey, and how those borders have changed over the years, both geographically and also people's relationship with the borders have changed. You know, some people want to go that way, other people want to go that way at different times, all these fun things. I talk more about it in another video. I'll link below. You learn so much, and it's so informative, but so entertaining at the same time. And it's really, really beautiful language. Cannot recommend this one enough. And then I just picked this up on a whim. The Spirit Catches You When You Fall Down, Hmong Child, Her American Doctors, and the Collision of Two Cultures by Fadiman. So I had read, I think, probably like a pretty large excerpt of this during college, but not the whole thing, which is why I have a copy meant to read at some point, and finally I decided to pick it up, and wow, it was way better as its whole book than an excerpt, really. So basically, post Vietnam, a lot of Hmong people were brought to the US as refugees, and they are to date the only ethnic group that really didn't melt into the melting pot, so to speak. They have kept their culture, their language, and so on and so forth, and that's a good thing. But this basically tells the story of one instance where that in combination with the absolute failure of the American medical system basically resulted in a young girl essentially dying. So this little girl, Leah, she's, you know, a toddler, and she has epilepsy. And for, you know, Americans, you take epilepsy medication and you don't get seizures and you don't get brain damage and you're fine. But for Hmong people, it means that the spirit has caught you and that sometimes you fall down, and these children are honored and their seizures are not welcomed, but it means your child is blessed, basically. So between the lack of translation, literal language translation, and also the cultural translation, the doctors could not get the parents to understand that they needed to give her medicine, and the parents couldn't express to the doctors that they thought they were completely incompetent. To be fair, because they were, and because basically the way you treat epilepsy, or at least at the time, I'm not sure if this is like up to date, but the way you treat epilepsy is you just try. It's kind of like depression. You try a medication. Does it make the epilepsy go away? No? Okay, let's try something different. Didn't work? Okay, let's try something different. And you basically just like trial and error your way into a point where you're on a certain kind of medication combo that basically means you don't have seizures anymore. And for people that were told like, oh, doctors know what they're talking about, that's not very impressive to say like, oh, well, this month you have to change the medicine and next month you have to change the medicine again. And like, it's like, she's still having seizures. So like, why am I doing all of this? And so since they weren't able to communicate that, and they didn't care to communicate that, they just did horrible things like call CPS on them, and yeah, it was a big mess. And so basically this is, alrighty, sorry, my camera battery died, but I was in the midst of gushing about this book. Don't remember exactly what I was saying, but essentially this is a classic for medical or health studies, cross-cultural communication, and it basically just illuminates the fact that, you know, translation, it really is just the most basic first level of what you need to do to actually understand someone from a different culture, with a different language, and the devastating consequences, obviously, that happen when you don't, that can happen, but I just think it was a really good book to be reading during Women in Translation Month, because I'm not a big person that's like, oh, I wish I could read the language in its original form so that I can really know what the author was saying. Like, obviously, I mean, yeah, if we all just like magically could speak hundreds of languages, that would be cool, but also it's okay, you know, that we're not all fluent in every language that we want to read literature from. So this book's a little bit humbling about, you know, the limitations of translation, but also I think it's nice to remember that, you know, translated literature is beautiful. It's its own work of art on its own. Like, the translator is usually a very accomplished writer. you don't just like become a translator if you don't already love literature and writing yourself. So anyway, I just thought it was really interesting food for thought during Women in Translation Month, and I'm really glad I finally read this classic in its entirety because it's so worth it. Alrighty, so those were all of the best books that I read for Women in Translation Month, and also just women writers in general month for me as well. And I really want to hear from you. What is the best translated book you read last month by a woman, or any book, you know, that you thought was fantastic that you read last month? I'm not normally a big like wrap up type of person at the end of the month, but I thought since Women in Translation is the best reading month of the year, that it was well worth it. And it was good because I got to talk only about the books that I really liked. So I want to hear from you about your favorites, and until next time, bye.